Hello, welcome. Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 19, Brazil. Let us start the lecture with environmental issues in Brazil. Half of the Brazil is covered by forest, with the largest rainforest in the world located in the Amazon basin. Within the delicate structure of this particular forest, which is as a whole is 40% of the globe's entire rainforest, exists one-fifth of the planetary oxygen production and one-fifth of the planetary fresh water. The Amazon is also home to the one-tenth of the planet's plant and animals population. Recent migration into the Amazon and large-scale burning of the forest area have placed the international spotlight on Brazil. Amongst the world's greatest environmental problem, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is without doubt the one which has caught the largest audience and attracted the most attention, being of the concern to a large number of actors, governments, international institutions, non-government organizations, and media. The Amazon rainforest and Pantanal Great Wetlands of the Mato Grosso are suffering from the effects of human intervention, from deforestation, slash and burn agriculture, highway construction, illegal mining, drug trafficking, and pollution. Dam building has also destroyed large stretches of rainforests. In 1992, Rio de Janeiro has been selected by the United Nations as the site for the last global town meeting ever held, the United Nations Conference for Environment and Development, better known as Earth Summit. Nearly every country in the world, thousands of journalists and even more NGOs participated in the meeting, featuring some of the world's best minds. The daunting task was to identify a blueprint for the future balancing of the conflicting priorities of the rich North and the poor South. The essence of the northern view favored environmental integrity in the service of the improved quality of life for current and future generations, which coincided around the concept of sustainability or long-term replicability. In sharp contrast, the South saw environmentalism as secondary to the inalienable right of poor Southern Hemisphere people to economic development, resulting in a higher standard of living for the world's disadvantaged. These two divergent goals had traditionally been seen as inimical, but the approach taken at Rio was different. The Earth Summit defined environmentalism and development as potentially complementary, and around this idea was forged a rare global consensus pointing towards a new goal, sustainable development. This concept of environmentally conscious forms of development was formalized in the document that emanated from Rio 92 called Agenda 21, which placed the whole world on the same page by pointing to sustainable development as the common goal for humankind's future. Reaching agreement on Agenda 21 represented a considerable achievement, but its acceptance as a political symbol could not answer whether sustainable development was in fact possible. It soon became apparent that while both the North and the South saw enough of what each wanted in Agenda 21 to accept its goal of sustainable development, the North focused on the sustainability component while the South prioritized the economic development for poor countries. Now let us move to the next point, the social challenges. Since the 1980s, Brazil has been going through a particularly serious period in relation to her social situation. A very large number of Brazilians are living in a state of poverty and destitution, whilst inequalities in terms of wealth and income has reached high proportions. The richest 10% households have 70 times the income of the poorest 10%. The poverty and inequalities have their roots in the country's past, but their more immediate causes can be found in the process of development based on the replacement of the import carried out by the state between the 1940s and the 1970s. In the crisis of that development pattern, in the failed attempts at economic adjustment, and in the consequences still incipient of the economic restructuring process imposed by globalization. Without any doubt, the pattern of economic growth based on protected industrialization was responsible for the upturn of an urban industrial economy that was diversified and complex in terms of both consumption and mass, and on the edge of capitalism. This growth pattern, however, was not able to eliminate poverty and wretchedness, although it had contributed towards their reduction at the most dynamic points of its cycle. Neither was it able to reduce the inequalities of wealth and income, having actually accentuated them during recent times. Certain social groups have remained permanently on the margins of its benefits. For example, the mass of rural workers without land, owners of tiny small holdings, increasingly impoverished and falling into debt, as well as contingents of marginal urban workers. The progressive weakening of this pattern of economic growth was accentuated throughout the 1980s, a period that was marked by the debt crisis, the increasing loss of economic dynamism, the mounting public debt, and the consequent crisis in the state and public administration, compounded by recurrent inflation and vicissitudes and uncertainties in relation to unsuccessful attempts to establish economic stability. The situation was made worse during that period by Brazil's social problems. There was once again an increase in the contingent of the poor and the destitute, accentuating the inequalities and increasing the vulnerability of certain sections of the middle and lower middle classes, especially those dependent on the state and its actions. Brazil moved into the 1990s at the same time as undergoing an economic restructuring process leading to technical and management modernization, as well as to business opportunities, causing sharper competition within the domestic market. These factors have had a profound effect, and over the next few years will continue to affect other occupational and social groups, mainly those directly linked to the peripheral pattern of industrial organization. The structural modification to the economy have had and will continue to have a negative impact on the job product elasticity and for not inconsiderable sections of the Brazilian people. The problem of employment and the job market could be more acute in the future than it has been in the past. The recent successful experiment in economic stabilization, represented by the Real Plan introduced in Brazil in the mid-1994, marked the beginning of a decline in that trend, especially for the poorest section of the population. However, with the ending of inflation, certain sections of population who had been benefiting from it could start to feel more vulnerable. These various processes are producing a complex structure that is marked by the exclusion and social vulnerabilities. These issues must be tackled by a varied range of public and government policies. To achieve this, a series of schemes and action aimed especially at the area of social development are being devised and introduced in an attempt to promote the consolidate and guarantee basic social rights and equality of opportunities, providing protection against situation of recurring risk and making social security available to vulnerable groups. Brazil's regional and social disparities are also reflecting in the great inequalities of its education system. In 1994, UNICEF rated Brazil's basic education system as being in the last place in the world ranking, with large rates of non-attendance in poor states. In a hopeful development, however, primary education in Brazil is being radically reformed. Over the past 10 years, illiteracy rates have been widening between the richest and the poorest states. And though the poverty started to decline in the early 1990s, it did so unevenly. The North is the only region that has seen poverty increase, rising from 36% in 1990 to 44% in 2001. Why are so many people being left behind when overall growth is good? The culprit is not a shortfall in average resources but persistently high inequalities. Not only the North seeing poverty increase, it is also the lagging on the HDI, unlike the wealthy urban South and unlike the Northeast, which has seen substantial improvement in its HDI. To this is added the additional challenge to the progress of Brazilian social issue, the demographic challenge. The demographic transition that has been in progress over the last 30 years has brought about significant changes in the age structure of the population, in family behavior and the job market. This has caused a far-reaching overhaul of the social security system involving its expansion and improvement. The challenge involved in carrying out these transformations must respect democratic institutions and give social policies a role in the process of consolidating and strengthening democracy within that context. Health indicators in Brazil have shown great progress over the last 50 years. The average life expectancy of Brazilians has increased considerably. Infant mortality rates, although they are still high by both world and Latin American standards, are almost 4 times lower than they were at the beginning of the 1940s. Now, the morbidity structure and the mortality profile have undergone substantial changes. The main causes of death earlier centered on the so-called communicable diseases are today to be found with increased urbanization among chronic degenerative diseases such as accidents and homicides, both resulting to a large extent by daily life in a large cities. This does not mean that communicable diseases have disappeared. They continue to exist, although concentrated in particular pockets of rural poverty and associated in large measure with migratory movement, notably in the northeast, north and central east regions. The northeast, for example, still shows high infant mortality rate, especially related to the poor state of the nutrition of a high proportion of children and newborn babies. The return of endemic diseases which had been eradicated, such as cholera and the emergence of new ones such as AIDS are new characteristics of the disease profile requiring new forms of preventative action from the government. In spite of the progress in Brazil still shows regional differences in its health indicators. Regions such as the northeast have sickness patterns which are very similar to those of the most backward countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, whereas the states of the south, southeast, and the federal district, which, in spite of the internal dissimilarity of the indicators, health conditions are to be found that are similar to those of many developed countries. Now, let us conclude the lesson or unit. Concerning economic and environmental issues, Brazil's position among global countries is prominent. Its economic output, population size, and bounty of natural resources all rank among the world's top 10. As a frontier society that expanded aggressively across a territory seen as the infinite, Brazilian culture developed a sense of profligacy or large-scale wastefulness. In particular, the belief that bigger always means better has caused problems for Brazil. This attitude continues to plague Brazil as a global critics point to wasteful economic and environmental practices tied to crash programs intended to solve problems quickly via massive spending on huge public projects. Despite its social heterogeneity, Brazil possesses a coherent national culture shared by most of its citizens. Racial miscegenation is one factor contributing to a widely accepted social tolerance. While examples of racial and ethnic discrimination can be cited in Brazilian history, they are less virulent, overt, and institutionalized than those experienced by minorities in the United States. Another factor binding Brazilian culture is the pervasive role of the Roman Catholicism, to which 80% of the population belongs. While many nations in the world possess a passion for the game of soccer, nowhere else do as many people follow the sport in a serious manner as in Brazil. This is true partly because no other country has enjoyed international soccer success to match that of Brazil. Soccer operates as more than mere entertainment in Brazil, making it another force contributing to a cohesive culture or a sense of Brazilianness. This unit began with a discussion of the demographic and historical background of Brazil. An examination of the economic history of Brazil shows the shift in the national economic approaches. The unit also looks into the political, environmental, and social concerns of development of the land and the people of the Brazil. Here we want to close this lecture as well as we have come to the end of the unit. Thanks for patientful hearing.